Chad Graeve, Operations Supervisor with Pottawattamie Conservation. Welcome to the Prairie Farm Podcast.
So here's the deal. Ken wanted me to start the podcast with this. I've got this rant that it is really important that people know how much is in your bank account. Not everybody. You don't need to be public about it. Somebody beside your spouse needs to know, and here's why. I had a friend in college. He came to me crying, me and another friend, he came to us crying because he was in such credit card debt. And I went to a Bible college. I had a lot of people confessing sins, just like that was the relationship I had with people. And not like I was making them do it. They just were struggling with an area of their life.
It's just another version of the Spanish Inquisition.
you know me, direct descendant of all the Spaniards. Actually, I guess, yeah, kind of.
You're like a cult leader. Come to me, my children.
No. They were confessing both ways, and I'm just going to be totally explicit. Most of what is confessed when you're a young adult is adult content, right? So you're trying to break that habit or break an addiction. And there were some people I knew that really had strong addictions. And them confessing their adult content addictions looked eerily similar to this friend and felt eerily similar to him confessing his financial struggles that he had been hiding. And I realized, shame doesn't care what you're struggling with. It'll hide in any way. So it was a big wake-up call when I got out of college and moved back to Iowa and started just asking friends, hey, how much money you got right now? Well, I start with how are your finances? And then they're kind of vague. And I'm like, how much money is that? Like, how much do you owe? Oh, okay. Well, how much money do you have in your bank account? You could feel them tensing up, but it's way better. I believe in a lifestyle of vulnerability, and it is very important to not hide just in general, and that includes in your finances.
And then his friends asked him how much he had, and Nick changed the subject to the weather. Talk about that sky, man.
Yeah.
Sure is
Anyway,
blue today.
the hike we went on just now, what a great hike. Anyway, I don't know why Kent wanted me to start with that.
I don't know.
I
It's
feel
just it's an interesting Nickism.
Yeah.
And I think there's some truth in there.
Ken and I've had some good conversations about it. And I felt the first couple times I asked, he was pretty hesitant, and now he's kind of...
Yeah. No, I just tell him, there's no money in there, Nick. Okay.
It's time for a raise.
There just isn't any.
That is so funny.
But I think when we're with Chad, we get into these deeper conversations, and it always boils back down into what the three of us are passionate about, which is ecology and conservation, and how can we help our ecosystems that we're a part of.
And how related that is to lifestyle.
Yeah, it's all tied to it. And I think when we first started this podcast, it'll be 3 years ago in a couple of weeks, we didn't necessarily think that we didn't predict we would see that link so strong, finances and conservation. But man, they are at least stepsisters, maybe blood brothers, but definitely at least stepsisters. Yeah. They are closely related, and it's how we treat each one of those things, I think, factors into the other thing as well. So I think it's important to discuss. But
money is, if you take all of the various major religion scriptures, you put them all together, money is the most talked about thing. And it's number 3 in the Bible. You know what I mean? It is super talked about. And because I think it's talked about so much in these major world religions is because it ties deeply with the human, deep inside of humans. And that's where conservation begins. They're not separate things.
So can't you say that finances, money, and conservation are tied together? Mm-hmm. Why would that be?
Well, they're a limited. It's a finite thing. Technically, both of them are, and they both. I think the way you treat both things reflects what's going on inside of a person too. What is it that they truly value or want? And I think if you have no knowledge, if you have complete ignorance to environmental issues or concerns, or if you just have interest in growing your monetary stockpile, then you're willing to let the environment around you suffer. That you're willing to accept that as a trade-off.
Yeah. I think what I'm thinking about is, to me, money is only currency. It's just something, it's artificial. It's something that humans have constructed as currency for resources or services. And so we exchange currency. People exchange currency with you for seed. Right. So that's a resource. Or you maybe exchange currency with a plumber for their service. And conservation is all about the natural resources. And so finances and conservation are intimately tied, because finances are only currency for resources, and we're dealing with natural resources that are finite, as you point out. So they're absolutely married. There's no way they couldn't be.
Interesting. I think so. Everybody knows that like money represents things, but I think the general consensus is that money represents the hours worked for it, or the product you made, the spent, or the resources of the tree that was cut down. That's definitely true. But I think more than anything, especially here in the West where we have plenty that we could possibly need, it represents a lot more, like the acceptance of your father you didn't get, or the status you never had in school and you're desperate to have, or the safety because your household was really unsafe place to be when you were a kid, and so you really felt out of control. But when your bank account's pretty big, now I feel in control. No one's going to take my house from me. You know, those kinds of things. I think when I find myself wanting more money, it is a great time to journal. It is, because there's something else going on inside of me. Because I don't want more bedside tables. You know what I mean? Yeah. I want to experience love from something that I might be feeling like I'm lacking in. And yeah.
I think it represents a lot of control too, right? I mean, money helps solve a lot of material problems, right? Car breaks down. Oh man. Well, at least I got money to pay for it, or money to buy a new one. Would really need a nanny to watch the kids. So, my wife can take this job and work this shift or whatever.
So I don't have to be bothered with them.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we'll say air quotes, solves problems. We view it that way, and giving us more control. And I think going back to your question on conservation, we love to control nature. Oh, yeah. And that's when our environment suffers, when we try to control it.
Yep.
How do you, because I mean, you are heavily affecting nature. How do you view that relationship? Because even us forcing prairie to come back to the ground is a form of us controlling it. How do you deal with that relationship? We got to control
these weeds.
Yeah. You know?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I know that in the natural resources field, land stewards will often have conversations about, what are you trying to restore this to? What are you trying to make this? Do you want this to be woods? Do you want this to be prairie? Do you want this? And it's not, in my mind, it's not about what we want. It's about what the land will be when the processes are restored. And so I look at
that's a good way to say it.
Here in the Loess Hills, we talk about how Lewis and Clark came through here and they called these hills bald because they were predominantly prairie, but there were trees here, but nothing like there are now. And so there's all these trees here now, and we experience higher rates of erosion. We don't have the same infiltration rates with water. So the landscape is actually being dewatered. And so it's not healthy. Why? Well, because the natural grazing regimes were interrupted or canceled. The natural fire regime was interrupted or deleted. And so we removed important processes from the land. And when I say we, I mean the Euro-American culture that moved in here. The human culture that was here before us was working within the system, and according to how the system functioned, we came in and took out critical processes. And then now the system is not functioning properly. And so my role is not to make this be a prairie or make this be woods. My role is to put the processes back in place that our culture removed, and then let this system function the way that it will. So we're not going to take it back to what Lewis and Clark saw. We're going to move forward in time, because time only moves forward. but we're going to put the processes back in place so the system can function. Now, in some cases, that means we do introduce seed in an area where the system changed from prairie to a really degraded woodland system, and there's no germ material left there to regenerate as we cut trees, and it's not healthy when it's covered with trees. So we will introduce seed from our surrounding remnant prairies to help that revegetate.
Interesting. That is exactly what we talk about with our pheasant. The point of the pheasant being it didn't used to be here. It's a different species, but it melds well. And so going into the future, it's a good system to have pheasants here. And we can't go back to exactly what used to be. We're not going to have 25 million acres of bison and prairie,
right.
But we can have something a lot better than what we do have. So, man, that is fascinating.
What do you think about? So lately, there's been, it's always talked about to some degree, but seems to be there's some ratcheting up on discussion of outlawing glyphosate, and I've noticed both sides of the issue have been talking more. Agrochemical lobbying efforts have been putting up billboards,
Yeah. The front of Successful Farming last month was.
Yeah. Which, by the way, check out the Successful Farming podcast because Nicholas is going to be on there here very soon.
Oh yeah, that's
right. He did an interview like a week ago that I was supposed to be on with him, and I could not. So thanks for covering that, buddy.
Feels so stupid for. We were asked to be on there, and even though they promote a bunch of things we don't agree with, I think getting our voice out. I think our message makes sense. So if you could just get it out there, people understand.
But there's just more talk around this idea of defending glyphosate and getting rid of glyphosate. I personally, this may surprise people on the podcast, I don't know exactly how to feel on the issue. I have a fair level of fear of glyphosate because it has proven to be linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Been some pretty big lawsuits that have paid out a lot of money.
It was linked heavily enough that a judge decided they were going to pay $2.5 billion for it.
Yep. But I also have seen it be a very effective tool in prairie reconstruction. Extremely effective. And there are a lot of herbicides that maybe cancer isn't what they cause, but as far as like posing immediate danger to those handling it or anyone who, let's say, got hit by overspray or something like that, far more concerning to be dealing with in that regard. So what do you think the answer is with glyphosate? Would you feel better if it was just out of the picture altogether and we work around it, we come up with other solutions, or keep using it?
It's a really good question, and it relates to a lot of the way that I view a lot of things, and that is, I don't know if glyphosate is the problem or if the way we use it is the problem. And so I think, we often talk about how humans have a higher intellect, and I just challenge us to use that. So
prove it.
So we tend to develop a reliance on things and go with the easy solution. And I think there are times when we're using glyphosate when maybe we could employ a different tactic. And so do we need to use it as much as we're using, or should we be examining, our tactics as a whole and then reevaluating where it fits in that? So to change the subject just a little bit to maybe a different example, is the chainsaw something that we should outlaw? Because it's been demonstrated that some of the forestry practices years ago where they would just clear cut and they would cut the whole mountainside.
Yeah.
That's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So should we get rid of the chainsaw, or should we just adjust our tactics? And now forestry is done in a different way where They know that they need to leave seed trees and that this needs to recolonize. And so you don't take everything, and you're more selective in the way that you harvest. So they're still using a chainsaw, but they didn't outlaw the chainsaw, right? They just changed the human dynamic in the way we employ the use of the tool.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I was thinking, Kent, that I see it like a chocolate cake. That's a good thing.
Thinking of Matilda right now.
The Matilda, the brand?
No, there's haven't you seen the movie The Roald Doll? It's based on a book, but the
No.
movie. Oh, anyways.
Sorry, bro.
All you other millennials out there know what I'm talking about.
Oh, the little redhead orphan. Who's the redhead orphan?
I think you're thinking of Annie.
No,
maybe.
not Annie. Madeline. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Madeline. Yeah, it's
Okay.
different.
No, different. Yep.
Yeah. So apparently we spend most of our time in Prairie. Don't know that much about the world. No, I think about it like chocolate cake. I like chocolate cake. Be very terrible for me if I used it. If I ate it all the time. It would also be terrible for Iowa if 2/3 of the state got sprayed with glyphosate twice a year.
I'm going to say got sprayed with chocolate cake twice a year.
Well,
I don't know. I think we should maybe try it.
Yeah. Who's to say the cloudy with a chance of meatballs, dude? I'd be the mayor so fast.
Oh, yes, you. Man, what? You guys have been wanting a book list here. Matilda and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. But yeah, I think you bring up some good points there. You know, how do we use it? Something that was brought to my attention recently, and I guess I probably should. Was it proven to cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma or just linked?
I have no idea. I mean,
whatever the legal term is, that's the one I'm using. Okay?
Yeah, I don't know how it seems like it would be very difficult to have a causality proven.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe if correlation's high enough.
A court ruling said that they owed these people compensation for cancer after using their product. We'll say it that way. But talking about something that I know less about, which is more dangerous, but I did learn recently or heard from somebody who seemed to know what they were talking about, and I've seen it referenced one other time, is the use of glyphosate in maturing some crops faster. So at the I think the ones that they use it for that I've heard of it are wheat and oats, and they use it, you know, at the end of its growing time to hit it with some concentration to, you know, speed up the process so you can, I guess, harvest sooner. It seems like it would be counterintuitive though in some ways, but if true, I think that'd be one of those common sense things that you're talking about where, hey, quit doing that because that'd cut out a lot of spray. I don't know. There's got to be ways though that we can lessen it. Mm-hmm. Do you guys have to use some herbicide for management?
Yes, we use glyphosate. Mm-hmm. We don't use it on a large scale, but like there are some places here. There's a piece of ground that we purchased years ago that had a long history of grazing and a long history of herbicide application to suppress broadleaf plants, and then also so season-long grazing year after year after year, coupled with herbicide application to get rid of broadleaf plants, many of them native, but also application of synthetic fertilizer. And so what the cumulative effect of all of those was to drive that system to non-native grasses, brome and fescue and such. And so when we acquired the property, then we started to reintroduce fire and tried to apply fire at times to suppress those cool season non-native species and see if we could get any native species that were in that system to express themselves. Over time, we've come to the realization that on that particular piece of ground, it needs help. Mm-hmm. It's not going to get there. And so now we're using glyphosate to kill off parts of it and overseed with native vegetation to just restart the system because there's no germ material there to rely on. Our first instinct is to just nurture that system to come back. But in this case, there's no system left. Yeah. So it's not coming back. So we have to start over. Yeah.
So this, you've done enough prairie reconstruction and management. What is your general... So usually what we coach people up is to have two killings when let's say they're going into old pasture, it's filled with brome. Have 2 rounds of herbicide treatment to take existing cover plus seed bank out of unwanted invasives. Is that generally what you guys do too? Or do you work a burn in there somewhere? Let's say you're going from a straight brome field to, a fairly diverse prairie that you're wanting there.
Yeah. So if you don't have patience and you want it to happen now, herbicide is the way to do it. If you can tolerate several seasons of work, then introducing grazing and fire in a way that can help you reduce the vigor of what's there, and then using an herbicide application to finish.
How would you
things
do
off.
that? You get free reign on the land. What would you? And you've got as many animals and herbicide or fire or whatever you want to do. It's with your imagination. What would you? When in the year would you start, and what steps would you follow over the next few years?
So let's just go with maybe a system that's dominated by smooth brome.
Yep.
So I like to run fire through that when the brome is flowering. In a typical year, that's late May or early June. It's a very slow, smoky fire. But what you'll find is that the brome regrows after that, but it's stunted all year. It gets about 2 inches tall, and it's very sparse. And so it isn't happy.
Yeah.
And so you could then go in a month or 2 later and graze it really hard. And so now you've smacked it twice in a growing season and can totally reduced its vigor.
How do you burn it when it's all green?
It's the thatch. It's
From the
last
year
year's
before?
material.
Okay.
That's what's carrying the fire.
Okay.
And then it's top killing the brome. And see, the brome has, at that point in the season, the brome has used its root reserves to leaf out and push out flowers. And so you've depleted its root reserves to an all-time low.
For no reward.
And then you zap it. And now it's got to use up the last of its root reserves to sprout again and regrow, and it just doesn't have much vigor. And so then if you go graze that, if it's what we already started talking about finances, right? So let's use the analogy of your bank account. If the tornado hits you and you're not insured and you now use all of your savings to rebuild your home, then if your home burns and you've depleted your savings, you have nothing to rebuild with, right? And so that's the position that we've put the brome in by burning it when it's at its lowest reserves and then grazing it as it's trying to come back. Now, anything that does come back, you can hit with herbicide and just, there's nothing left.
Are cows the best to graze with? Because they will go, because they'll go to dirt, really, right?
If they're forced to, yeah. Or they'll just push through the fence.
So we've seen that quite a bit from our neighbors.
I mean,
they like our fields.
some people would tell you sheep because sheep graze down real tight. Cows are what we use because cows are readily available. I mean, cows are plentiful in Iowa. And then we also use cattle because we're trying to set this system up for the reintroduction of bison, and cattle most closely mimic bison. Sheep don't graze like sheep are farther from bison on the grazing spectrum than cattle are. So that's why we typically use.
So just one burning and one grazing?
You could, if everything's properly timed, I think you could reduce the vigor enough that you could follow up with an herbicide application and be ready to plant.
Wow. So burn in the spring,
There you go,
graze
Jay
that
Comfort.
summer, spray it again that fall when the cool season are trying to come back, and then you can plant that fall.
I think so.
Man, wow. So for anyone who's got unlimited resources, there's a perfect plan for you.
Honestly, if you had enough regrowth coming after that burn, might be a nice favor to a neighbor who's got some livestock that they need to, as long as it's not super huge hassle to move them over to your field, and you have the infrastructure to keep them in your field while they're grazing. Podcast listener Derek sent me some photos recently of, he got some of those satellite collars that I think similar to what Adam
For
uses
cows?
for his goats, for his cows. So maybe that could be another application there too, is using some of those. But yeah, I like that. It's fun hearing some herbicide alternatives, and I think it would probably be wise as small as this quote unquote industry is of prairie reconstruction, it would probably be wise for all of us to be looking at some glyphosate alternative methods in case we were to lose the ability to use it. And so it's always good to be adjusting in that way.
Yep. Man. So I want to ask a question then. What, because of Loess Hills, we're talking about the Loess Hills. We're talking about sandy, very erodible soil. I just on intuition, which is wrong.
I would say more silty than sandy.
Silty. So, but either way, it's HEL. It's highly erodible.
Yep.
And based on my intuition, which is wrong about 90% of the time, I would not want to introduce ginormous hooves to that land. I feel like it would rip it up. Why? Explain to me how that's. I mean, I know benefits of grazing, tons of them, but that con almost alone feels like it would outweigh the pros on that sheet. Can you explain that for me?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be counterintuitive, right? And I think part of that is because when we think of grazing, we think of the way we've traditionally done grazing, which is season-long, pretty intense pressure. And that's not how we're grazing here. And so the animals develop different habits. And what we're seeing here is that they're hanging out in the valleys more than they are up on the ridges. And they go to the ridges when weather conditions or more importantly, when the vegetative conditions say, hey, it's tasty right now. Right. And that's not as much as you would think. And so they spend more time in the valleys where they're doing maybe less damage, but also the hoof impact is really only damaging, at least from my experience, is really only damaging when the vegetation is in poor condition. And the vegetation is in poor condition if you repeatedly graze it season long. So if your stocking rate is low enough that they're free to choose and free to roam, and they're not intensively grazing over and over and over all season long, then you have healthier root systems. And that's really what holds this soil, is the root system. So
there's a lot of resources that would need to go into the bison. Is it primarily here for the land, or are you guys hoping to educate people with it, sell the buffalo meat? What is the point of the bison here?
Well, the primary reason for putting bison here is because they're part of how this system functioned, and I'm trying to restore those processes. So fire is the process that probably most people are accustomed to hearing about, and we started putting fire back into this system almost 30 years ago. But grazing, there's an interaction that happens between grazing and fire that's really important. And so grazing is another process that's been removed from the landscape or altered on the landscape, changing from migrational grazing patterns to concentrated season-long, year after year.
Yeah.
But grazing is an important component in how this system functioned. Sunlight, and that's why we're cutting trees, is to get sunlight back down to the ground so that the herbaceous plants can return and hold the soil. We're not cutting all the trees, but we're thinning it out just to get the right light levels.
Yeah.
And so the primary reason for putting bison back in here is because they're part of the system, and the system is healthier when it has all of its pieces.
Would there be hope of adding elk too at some point?
Yeah,
really?
Bison and elk.
So you have the land to be able to sustain elk? Because don't they need quite a bit more?
I wouldn't think they would need more than bison, would they? As far as
I don't know yet. And that's this piece of land. Once we've acquired all the properties that we hope to, it will tell me over time what the right stocking rate is. And so we'll start with a low stocking rate and observe how the elk interact with the place and observe how the bison interact.
It's probably good to do it that way and not be like, let's get a bunch of them and then work down from there.
Yeah. And that's in our stewardship philosophy here is we don't know. The land knows.
Yeah.
And so we have to pay attention to how our actions elicit a response on the land. And then that guides us and tells us, okay, that wasn't the right thing to do, or this is making things healthy, and so we can continue with that tactic.
Interesting.
What kind of problems do people who, so it's easy for us when we come here to visit to focus on this area. Which one is this is Hitchcock just the name of this center we're in right now, or is the whole preserve?
The whole preserve, Hitchcock Nature Center.
Center. Okay. So it's easy for us to focus on all the good, healthy, ecology going on right here on this property. But the Loess Hills stretch, basically the whole western edge of Iowa, right?
200 miles.
And there's a lot of people living, farming, doing other stuff in the Loess Hills. I just got to think that like it's risky to build here. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine driving on these roads in the winters is not a white knuckle experience for a lot of people mm-hmm. on their driveways and so forth. I mean, what is it desirable land for people to be living in the Loess Hills and doing life, or is it more of do you I guess what I'm getting at is, do you think eventually it could be largely vacated because the land is just too hard to tame in that way, or I mean, do you think it'll just continue to be developed like pretty much everything else in Iowa has been? Yeah,
I think it'll continue to be developed. I mean, this landform has had human inhabitants for thousands of years. It's a good place to live.
Mm-hmm. Why?
Why? Well, I'm a little biased. It's my home. It's a beautiful landscape.
Yeah.
And it's bountiful, and ultimately the earth provides everything that we need. Right. Mm-hmm. And so what we have in this particular landscape is a system that produces vegetative growth, whether that be for building materials as trees mm-hmm. or heating as trees, or food that we can consume, the plants that are growing here and the animals that subsist on those plants. And it has clean water. For the most part. I mean, we do know that Iowa suffers from water quality issues, some of the poorest water quality in the country. And so that's an issue. But I think we understand that issue, and I think we understand that we're the cause of that, and we just need to change our behavior.
Yeah.
Why is the water quality good here?
Well, relatively speaking, I mean, it's poorer than it was at the time of settlement.
It's higher up the gradient, so there's less stuff running into.
I mean, there's just a lot of water available here because we're getting out of the rain shadow of the Rockies, right? So the water quantity is good. The quality is deteriorating because of what we're doing on the landscape.
Interesting. Do you guys get your water from like an above ground source, like some sort of rainwater or reservoir source, or are you guys drilling to like aqueduct?
Straight out of the aquifer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Aquifer. Thank you. Aqueduct of the Roman Empire.
Well, just a little bit of pipe.
Oh, man.
So let's get back to burning a little bit. You talked about timing, and this is something we're wanting to do a deep dive on the podcast. We got a friend named Jeremy French who's with the Southeastern Grassland
Institute.
That's right. Down in Tennessee is where he's located, but have you done, I assume you guys have, some experimenting with, growing season burns and some, something that people talk, it's almost a cliche is, burn in the fall for Forbes. And those, whereas when you drive around Iowa in March, there's always smoke on the horizon if it's a clear, non-windy day. And, that's, from talking with Jeremy, that's basically the worst time to burn because it doesn't get, other than removing thatch, it doesn't really get you anything. And it instead sets the table for cool season grasses to really establish themselves. So it's something we want to help people understand how to do better. Now we've preached May burning a lot on this podcast, and I'm kind of fine tuning that through my experience. I think very early May can be okay. But I think probably like those last days of April is probably the safest. And the only reason I say that is for ground nesting birds. Once you start getting it close to that 10th of May, and CRP, I think, cuts you off on the 10th of May, doesn't
15th.
it? Or is it 15th?
Yeah.
For no burning after this point, because the ground nesting birds are, and I've witnessed that effect. You see a cooked nest, you're like, oh shoot, I wasn't wanting to do that. Or you might have even if you got too late into May, you might have a bunch of hatchlings, and they can't get away from the flames. So there's some nuance there, but definitely a May burn is far better than a March burn. But what about some of these growing season burns, like summer burning? What is being achieved with? We'll start there with a summer burn, and when would you consider a summer burn?
So you're asking the wrong guy, and that's because
Go ahead and cut that out, Nick.
my attitude about this has changed quite a bit over the years.
Well, let's hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I first got into the field, I was coming from a graduate school perspective, an academic perspective, and I'd been reading the literature and the science on fire and timing of application and those kinds of things. And you're right. People are recommending that if you want to stimulate forbs, burn in the fall. If you want to suppress smooth brome, burn late May, early June. And so growing season fire, dormant season fire, spring fire, fall fire, all have a different effect on the system. And so initially I was burning according to those objectives. I mean, that's the essence of prescribed fire.
Right.
You prescribe the conditions that you need. When I say conditions, I mean fuel conditions, weather conditions, timing, those kinds of things. You prescribe the conditions that you need in order to apply fire to accomplish specific pre-identified ecological objectives. Suppress smooth brome, top kill woody vegetation, whatever the objective might be. And so that's how I was operating. And then over time, and Jerry Wilhelm was one that helped me really open my eyes to this, I realized the indigenous people were primarily burning during the dormant season and primarily burning in the fall after a killing frost. And they were burning every year. And so, and they were, they come at it from a little different attitude than we do, which is, how are we going to make this area do what we want it to do?
Yeah.
Okay, we want to get rid of this brome, so we're going to apply a fire at this time, right?
We want
to be in control.
Fair, they didn't have to worry about brome yet. But.
Right, that's right. But we want to be in control. We want to make this piece of ground do what we want. And so we're going to wield fire as a tool, a surgical tool to accomplish what we want.
Right.
Whereas with the indigenous people, it was more a process. And it's a rhythm. It's an ancient rhythm of the land that the humans were the catalyst for. And so we're now on our highest quality remnant systems. That's how we're burning. We're burning every year, and we're burning in the fall after a killing frost.
That is so interesting.
In our reconstructed systems that are really just, we remade this system, or in heavily altered systems, we will still apply fire in a prescribed manner. Like the pasture type scenario where we're trying to suppress the smooth brome or something like that. But by and large, in the highest quality remnant systems, it's more restore the processes as they happened historically and let the system fall back into those ancient rhythms.
I love that.
I won't lie. I feel very validated right now. I've been saying fall burn for a while. Nobody takes me up on it. Nobody. Yeah. But
we do. I mean, there are effects that we see. Like we'll still occasionally use a summer fire for certain reasons. You can just smack the brush with a summer fire because for kind of the same reason with the brome, right?
All those shrubs are leafed out.
They're leafed out. They're flowering, so they've used up their root reserves. And then you send that fire through there, and you scorch the bark, and you wilt the leaves, and it's real hard on it.
I've been telling Ken and I've been talking. I think. Not just a religious practice, but there is something to the leaving land lay dormant, fallow, year 7, every 7th year. And so we can't burn in the summer if we're going to try and get seed off of off a field. But if we're not, it'd be kind of cool to do. Now you got to be careful. You can't do it in like September because of the cornfields, around us and stuff like that. But you could do it, you could do it July, and still be all right. And
well, but in our case too, it's a little different because we're not dealing with we're dealing with prairie species, of course, but we're dealing with monocropped fields in most cases.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
So, I mean, it may not provide any benefit.
Yeah,
In that case,
Dad has really been pushing the CRP should have an allowance for grazing, for haying, and then for fallow. Grazing, haying, fallow. And he says even if it's 2 years fallow and then a year grazing and then a year haying or some sort of mix in between there.
can you imagine how much prairie would inadvertently be spread around if guys could hay it?
Yeah.
Oh man.
You know,
Yeah, that
rolling
would
out
be
bales
awesome.
Off of native plant bales.
Yeah, well, I mean, you'd start. I mean,